Hi, this is Jack Olmstead, GMO Free News. I have a very special guest today, Mike Connell, and he is a retired journalist, and we're going to be talking about the pipeline, the KWA, and his experience with Michigan politics. How are you doing today, Mike?
Hi, Jack. It's good to be.
And he's joining us on his iPhone, so in a hotel, and so we might lose connection from time to time. But if we do, we'll just pick it up from where we lost it. So, Mike, why don't you give us a little bit of your background? How did you get into journalism? Why don't you take us back to the beginning?
To the beginning. I started at a newspaper after I graduated from high school. So in 1969, I went to work for my hometown newspaper in West Virginia, and just did the regular progression up through the reporters' ranks and became the city editor, and then moved on to a bigger paper in Florida, and then ended up with a Gannett paper in West Virginia, and became Gannett. Worked at Gannett papers for most of my career, moving from town to town, sort of a newspaper nomad. In 1988, I came to Port Huron, Michigan, as the executive editor of the Times Herald. And my wife and I decided we were tired of moving, so we put down stakes in Port Huron. My wife's a special education teacher, so we raised our three sons in Port Huron and have lived there now for over 25 years. Yeah.
And you live on a farm.
I do. We live on 17 acres outside, about six or 7 miles outside of Port Huron. Yeah. So I have a barn and a granary, and it's an old homestead. So.
Did you raise any crops?
No, I rent my fields. So a farmer. I have an orchard. It's mine, but the field, the 11 acres that are in row crops are all rented out. So I'm not a farmer.
So is that like apples? Is that what you have in your orchard?
Yeah, well, apples and pears. Yes, right. Yeah. So, but
and do you have them for personal use, or do you sell them at farmers markets?
No, I don't. Yeah, it's just strictly for personal use. Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm not in farming for any kind of profit. It's just we didn't intend to to move to a farm. We bought the house and the farm came with it.
So you're kind of in the rural community. You're not in the big city.
That's true. Yes, we drink well water and use propane. You have a propane pig in the backyard, and that's our fuel. Yeah, we're country people now. I grew up in a town, so this is all new for us, but we've been out there now for 17 years. So I guess I'm country now, I guess.
Your country. Now, does the Detroit water line from Lake Huron to Flint run by your property?
It's across the road. So it's literally, it'd be 100, maybe 100 yards tops, a little less than that from my barn. Is the Detroit water line. There's a road there called Metcalf Road, and the Detroit's water treatment plant is on Metcalf Road, right near the lake. So it follows Metcalf Road across St. Clair County to Imlay City, and there's a pumping station in Imlay Township actually, and they split the flow there. It's a 10-foot main. So you can imagine you could drive a truck down it. I mean, it's the size of basketball, 10 feet, a round pipe, and so at Imlay Township, they split it, and I don't know exactly how much goes, but roughly half and half. Half goes to Flint, and the other half goes down into the Detroit's northern suburbs, into Oakland County, Macomb County. Yeah. So, but the water line does go right back. In fact, my neighbor across the road has a sand pit on his property, and he sold them sand when they were building the pipeline. It's right there.
When did you start following the politics of the pipe?
Well, when when Flint, well, Genesee County announced its plan to build a pipeline, it struck me as, I mean, I was reading the stories on it. They said, we're tired of being ripped off by Detroit, so we're going to build this pipeline. And it made absolutely no sense to me. The Detroit pipeline has never been used to even half of its capacity. I think it's probably never more than a third of its capacity.
Do you remember when you were reading those reports? Is this before 2010? Is this like back in 2000?
The year that they started the Genesee County pipeline would have been, I think, 2009, I believe.
That's when they were talking about it.
Yeah, when they first started talking about
trying to raise the money or justifying the cost.
Yeah, and they were selling it to the community, you know, and talking about all the benefits they were going to get. They would control their own water, and the unions were all signed up for it because it was going to mean jobs, construction jobs. They wouldn't be dependent on Detroit anymore. So Genesee County complained of being ripped off by Detroit, that they were being gouged on prices by Detroit Water. So they were going to go it alone. Well, Detroit had doubled doubled what they would charge, I think 9 million to 18 million. So now they're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on this water line. And I never saw the return on investment. What was the ROI for it? Because even if you save $9 million a year, how many years do you have to save $9 million to get to 500 million or whatever you're going to spend on your own water line?
Well, even if you spend like 500 million on it, you got interest that accrued. I mean, could you ever get out of that interest payment?
Well, and you don't. And these are not rich. These are not wealthy communities to begin with. So they're going to be borrowing that money from Washington and Lansing, you know, from the federal and state governments. So it's going to be coming from all of us. There's just no way that community can raise that kind of money. But you know, more to the point, there's already a perfectly good pipeline there. So they're duplicating something that exists. And you could have taken that money, those hundreds of millions of dollars, and going into Flint where you need to replace the old water pipes, for instance, and spent that money in the city of Flint, you know, replacing old lead pipes with modern pipes. But instead, we're spending all this money to create a duplicate pipeline that runs 6 miles north of this one. I mean, they're literally separated by 6 miles. It's Metcalf Road is the southern end of Birchville Township, and Fisher Road, where the Flint pipeline is the northern side of Birchville Township. And in Michigan townships are 6 miles. You know, six by 6 is a full size township. Birchville isn't because it's not like Huron. So, but if it were a full size township, you know, I mean it's 6 miles. It's crazy. It's just a crazy waste of money.
Now
I started writing columns about it.
Right. So the Detroit pipeline that was built back in 1964. Tell us the construction that they put into that pipeline.
Well, the Detroit pipeline was planned in the 60s. The planning was done, but it was actually built I think the disaster were 22 or 20. I never remember. 22 or 23 miners died. I believe it was in 1971, in December of 1971. So, but yeah, so it was built. Detroit, remember, that's the height of the Cold War, and at that time, Detroit was considered, if the Soviets attacked the United States, one of their first targets would be Detroit. You know, Detroit, and because of the auto industry and things like tanks were being built there, and then you know Pittsburgh would have been another prime target. So they were afraid they would get an atomic bomb attack, and Detroit was pulling its water out of Lake St. Clair, which is on the strait between Lake Huron and Lake Erie. Lake St. Clair's average depth is only 11 feet. It's a very shallow lake, and they were afraid if an atomic bomb hit it, it would vaporize that lake. So they wanted to put their water intake in Lake Huron at a deep enough that the atomic bomb wouldn't vaporize it, and that's what they did. And they dug a tunnel. You know, they dug like a 7-mile tunnel from out into the lake, and the water intake, and you know, put it in the deep water, and that's where this water for Detroit comes from. It's coming from out in Lake Huron. You know, it's Lake Huron. The Indians or the French rather called it the Sweetwater Sea. You know, my French isn't too good, but it's you know, Sweetwater was kind of the nickname for it. So it's good water. Lake Huron is very good, and they piped it. And Flint, well, how much do you want me to go on this? But Flint had tried to build a pipeline of its own in the 60s, and corruption stopped that. They had a scandal so they ended up signing up with Detroit to buy water, Detroit Water, and that went online in the early 70s.
So you weren't a big fan of this new pipeline that was being built by the KWA?
Simply because of the waste. To me, it was government waste. You were going to spend, I mean, they gave different numbers for how much it was going to cost, but you know, they would say as low as 200 million or as much as $500 million. But whatever, and then I think there were other costs because they're building an entire water system with water treatment and the whole 9 yards. But whatever it was, whether it's $1 billion or $500 million or 200 million, you already had it. You already had water. You were just duplicating something that existed. It was crazy to me that you would spend that kind of money for something that you didn't, when there's so many things we need. You know, every town in Michigan needs sewers. You know, every time we get a heavy rain, our sewers are overflowing raw sewage into the rivers. Detroit's the biggest polluter of the Great Lakes, is the city of Detroit, with their sewers overflow every time it rains. They need to spend billions of dollars to clean up their sewers. And so with all these infrastructure needs, these real needs in society, why would we spend this kind of money on a duplicate water line? And it was crazy. It was the Democratic political machine in Wayne County in Detroit was gouging the Democratic political machine in Genesee County, which decided that it was tired of being ripped off, so it was going to build its own. But there was just never any common sense to it. I wrote about it.
In one of your columns, you said that the pipeline was being built because of greed, not need.
Yes, exactly. And greed was, there's every utility is regulated by the Michigan Public Service Commission. So if I'm Detroit Edison selling electricity, I want a rate increase. I have to go to the state PSC, and they'll decide whether it's warranted. And they're presumably at least thinking about protecting the consumer. I'm not sure that they always do a very good job of that, but in theory, at least, they are a consumer watchdog. Well, there is no the PFC doesn't do anything with water utilities. Water is unregulated in Michigan. There's no Public Service Commission approval if I want to raise my water rates. So Detroit can charge, Genesee County or Flint, whatever it wants. And then Flint can buy that water from Detroit and it can charge its customers whatever it wants. And there's nobody, except for, the whatever grassroots pressure you can put together. There's nobody in a position of authority to kind of intervene, or some neutral party who can look at it and say, okay, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense.
But when the cities are under emergency management, doesn't this fall under the domain of emergency manager? Well,
presumably it did. We had both cities were under emergency managers at one point. Detroit and Flint both, when these decisions were being made. So in theory, the governor had complete control because, the city councils and the mayors of those towns had were essentially cut out of they couldn't do anything without approval from the emergency manager who was working for the governor. So in effect, the governor kind of, he took over and everybody thought that would be good, It was particularly the Republicans, because he's a Republican governor. The Republicans were going to take over and make things right. But, they also, when things all went to crap, they did it, they have to own it. It was their incompetence and their callousness So, you have a blend. You have the Democratic corruption and greed on one side, and then this Republican callousness and incompetence on the other side. And you have this unholy marriage of those. And the people are they just getting hammered from, there's nobody standing up for them except for whistleblowers like the professor from Virginia Tech. There are no heroes. There's no other heroes in this whole story. I think you and I were talking about that earlier. There's just, there are villains and there are victims. There are no heroes in this story as far as our public servants or our elected officials.
Well, the only hero was Miguel del Toro at the EPA. He couldn't sleep at night, and so he is the one that brought Dr. Mark Edwards in to the equation because of the mother, Leanne Walters. Her lead levels in her house were higher than this EPA scientist had ever seen before. It was like 340, and they're trying to keep it down under 15.
Right.
And so he knew that the bureaucracy would handcuff him from doing anything. So on his own, he brought in Mark Edwards, who had experience in Washington, D.C. and at other municipalities around the country. But he really fought lead contamination in Washington, D.C. back in 2001, 2004, and failed miserably. Nobody went to jail. They claim nobody got hurt, nobody died, but he thinks otherwise. And this was Washington, D.C., where they polluted the community. And so he, from that experience, I'm sure, felt we're not going to have another Washington, D.C. in Flint, Michigan. And so he saw the perfect storm. And so that's why he wanted to cross all his T's and dot all his I's at the very, very beginning and document everything that he did because of his experience in Washington, D.C. So there are some heroes, but they worked outside the system. And those that worked in the system, they did what they had to do to keep their job. But we had an interview with a biologist, chemist who worked at the MDEQ for 30 years. As she left because she was, quote, a whistleblower. And she just talks about the incompetence and the colonialism that happens within the MDEQ to the point where people get promoted and they get put into jobs not because of what they know, but who they know. So the whole infrastructure collapsed upon itself because people were in positions at the MDEQ that had no reason for being there except that they knew somebody. So there are lots of blame to go around, but yeah, and the villains is really the bureaucracy, I think. And everybody, they said that it would never happen, in Nazi Germany where they were exterminating the Nazis, that, everybody said, I was just doing my job. And it's like, well, that's no excuse. Well, here we are here in America, and people were saying, well, I was just doing my job. They poisoned a whole community. And everybody feels as though it's not my fault. I was just doing my job. I was just paying my bills. I was just going along to get along. I mean, what's wrong with that? That's kind of the American way, especially when you're in a community.
It's a cultural thing, I think, too. I mean, I'm not an insider, so I don't know this, but it's just a suspicion that we talk about that we need to deregulate the environment. The tree huggers have gotten too much power, and businesses over-regulated. We need less regulations, and we need to be more cost efficient. We need, so all the things they were emphasizing, but what they forgot to emphasize was why these agencies exist. Why environmental quality. I mean, I remember growing up beside the Monongahela River, you couldn't swim in it, and now you can water ski in it. I mean, we did in a generation or so, we cleaned up a lot of rivers, and now we're going to start. It's like we've forgotten all the lessons of the past, and we're going to do it all over again. We're going to poison ourselves again and have to clean it up all over again. It's just crazy to me.
But when you poison us today, we have more powerful chemicals than we did back in the day. And we have a chemical cocktail mix that nobody knows how these chemicals interact with each other. And you're taking it from the air, you're taking it from the water, you're taking it in from your food. And we have people with compromised immune systems. And you say, us, well, are we talking about infants? Are we talking about kids? Are we talking about elderly? As you get older, your immune system starts to get compromised. People, and today, more people are getting cancer than 20 years ago, and for all kinds of reasons. I mean, it's pretty insane what we are living under, and nobody knows. Nobody can point the finger and say this is the reason. I had a call yesterday, a couple of days ago, from a group out of Florida, and they said we're working on a cancer vaccine. We need your help. It should be out in like 2 years. How much would you like to, give? Because we're going to cure cancer with a cancer vaccine. People are out saying that you take the shot, and therefore it's kind of like a GMO organism, where they can spray the heck out of you. You can drink the water, and you're going to be okay. Well, it's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. What happened 10 years ago and how they cleaned up things 10 years ago isn't going to be the same as today. But anyway, let's talk about the political climate in Michigan, because you wrote pretty extensively on cover-up and corruption in your career, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, Michigan's a mess. It really is just an absolute mess. Probably the least, well, according to the people who rate these things, we have the least transparent state of all 50 states. Governor gave out some of his emails on the Flint situation, for example. Well, in most states, you or I could have to lie. Those emails. You can't in Michigan. He's an imperial governor, and the legislatures are too. That their correspondence is not open to public, and so we don't. We have this closeted government.
Well, the way
down by both our political parties.
Yeah, I saw that the way he gets around this sort of thing is like, sure, I'll show you my emails, but I can't expose the people that I sent them to. And then again, when they have lawyers involved, well, that's confidential. So I can't share any of my correspondence with my lawyer. So there's all these loopholes that they throw at you. Right. So they're not being
his own cabinet members.
What's that?
His own cabinet members, he wouldn't give out their emails. So
that's right.
If the spokesman is getting emails, or if his chief of staff is getting emails, those didn't, unless they went to the governor, they weren't shared, and he didn't. So, he was like by showing us these emails, but in reality, if he was all about transparency, which he says he is, I mean, he would just they wouldn't have this problem with, you could just go look at his email.
Well,
why would you hide them unless there was some specific, good reason to hide it? If you were doing a contract or whatever. But just the day-to-day business of the state ought to be open. It ought to be there for anybody to look at. I mean, why would you hide that? I don't understand it. I don't get it. But it's like so many people now want authoritarian. It's almost as if they want to live with an authoritarian government. I don't understand, why there's not more outrage.
Well, apathy is pretty big in Michigan, aren't they? Because they just feel that, they're powerless. People are powerless. They're under
Oh, we've been
the boot of the regime.
let down by both political parties, and this Flint is a perfect example of that. Patrick was the mayor of Detroit. Went to prison, but as part of that, we found out that he was using the Detroit Water and Sewerage Board as his personal ATM. They were taking money. I mean, they were at the same time they were gouging their suburban customers, customers in Oakland County and Flint or Genesee County, Macomb County. They were taking that money and putting it in their pocket. I mean, it was literally the personal ATM for I call it Kwame Inc. His dad called him Michael Corleone was his nickname. Kwame Kilpatrick's father's nickname for Kwame was Michael Corleone. It tells you everything you really need to know right there. So that's the Democrats. They're
so when they found that he was taking the money and putting it in his own pocket, did the customers get any rollbacks on the rates?
Oh, never, no.
They never go back. They never go back on the rates. It's like, oh my God, we've got people that are extorting money from the system. No, never any rollbacks. It's like, okay, well, that money's going to go into the general fund.
Yeah, no rollbacks.
Or it's going to go. Or it's going to go. Go ahead.
Oh, he brought in a guy from Puerto Rico to run his water plant, and he went to prison too to run the water. See, Detroit Water, interestingly enough, was when they were building that pipeline to Flint, the pipeline we're talking about. That was world class. That was one of the best water departments in the world. I mean, it was as good as of course, Detroit, remember, was a city of 2 million people in 1950, 1960. And
you're talking about the city of Detroit or the city of Flint?
The city of Detroit.
City of
2
Detroit.
million people. Yeah.
2 million people?
Detroit was the fourth biggest city in the United States in 1950. So it was a city of 2 million. Yeah, now it's like 600,000, I think 700,000 maybe. But it was a city of 2 million, and their water, which was the whole region, it was not just the city, but it was the region. It was run by professional engineers, and they were covered by civil service. So there was no political interference with them. They were running a quality. I mean, they're running a first-class operation. They're the ones that decided to put that water intake out in the lake for the bomb. They were also going to build nuclear power plants along that water line. So that plans for that ended with 3 Mile Island, when those ended up being natural gas-fired power plants because of 3 Mile Island. But they were going to need lots of water in fact, Flint bought where its water take is. They bought it from Detroit Edison, where Detroit Edison was going to bring in water for its nuclear power plants. But in any case, Detroit had this great water department. And when Coleman Young was the mayor, he decided that he wanted control of the water department. And when they revised the city charter, one of the things they revised was they got rid of that professional management of the water department, and that was protected by civil service, and instead made it a mayoral. They gave the mayor control of it, so the mayor could put his political appointees in those jobs. And like Kwame did when he brought a guy in from Puerto Rico who's now in prison, they were engineers, but they were political hacks too, And so again, there's nobody in the state of Michigan. It's obviously there's just no adult supervision in the state. There's nobody with the authority, with the courage or the grit or the gumption to say, "Hey guys, this is wrong." There's no. They can do whatever they want to with these water rates, for instance. They can gouge each other so that one goes out and spends hundreds of millions of dollars as a remedy. When if there was a strong governor, he would have said, "Wait a second, Detroit, you can't keep. You're not playing fair with the people in Flint, and you need to, instead of building a new one, make Detroit charge a reasonable price." and tell Flint to, live with Detroit water, and make it work. And if you're the governor, you presumably have the clout. I mean, if they don't want to go along with you, you have other ways to make them play.
Well, both cities were under emergency management, so
in the end. But I mean, even before, they weren't under emergency managers when Flint was when Flint first started. When not Flint, but Genesee County first started talking about its water line. Jennifer Granholm was the governor. She was a Democrat, and there were no emergency managers. This was the Democratic political machines of the two counties. Yeah. So, but so we got rid of the professional management. We put the politicians in charge of it, and then we're surprised when they don't do anything but all they've done is put money in their own pockets. And meanwhile, you have, like I say, Detroit is the #1 polluter of the Great Lakes, probably only because Chicago diverts its sewage down into the Mississippi River. If Chicago was still sending its sewage out into Lake Michigan, it would probably be the #1 polluter. But since it sends its sewage down into the other watershed, Detroit is the largest single point polluter of the Great Lake. Is sewer. The sewer overflows from Detroit.
So you coined a phrase: Detroit flushes, everybody else drinks.
Yeah, Toledo. Yeah, Toledo drinks.
Toledo drinks, but that could be true for any of the municipalities that draw their water from.
Well, Toledo's at the wrong end of the Detroit River, so it's actually I could say Monroe, Michigan too was right on the lower end of the Detroit River, but where the Detroit River goes into Lake. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the geography here, but Lake Huron comes in, funneled the three great upper Great Lakes. The water from that comes by Port Huron and goes down the St. Clair River into Lake St. Clair, and then into the Detroit River. So that's the strait. Detroit is the French word for strait. That's what the strait is. Detroit. Let me say my French isn't too good, but Detroit. So it became Detroit, but it's spelled. It literally means the strait. So it's the strait between Lake Huron and Lake Erie. And so Toledo sits at the western end of Lake Erie. So, of course, it also gets Toledo's also getting all the runoff from farm fields, and they have toxic algae in Lake Erie blossoming every summer now, and they can't drink their water because it's poisoned by this toxic algae. So, speaking of your messes.
So again, Flint is kind of a canary in the coal mine. They're the worst to suffer, but there are other municipalities that are struggling with delivering clean water to their citizens.
Well, and I get the impression from the things going on in Washington that as opposed to being a priority to safeguard our water supply, that they want to go the other direction. They want to kind of gut the Clean Water Act and just kind of go back, take a step backwards. One thing to be an American, one of the things there were certain birthrights that American have. Being born in America, as you and I were, or people of our generation, was that you would have clean water. That was just an expectation. You could go anywhere in this country and turn a tap on, and you could drink water. It'd be potable water coming out of the spigot.
You wouldn't even think about it. I mean, you would not even think about it.
Yeah, and now you don't have any idea what you're getting. You just, and look, we're drinking these plastic bottles of water. Whoever, when I was a kid, if you just said people were going to sell water for, $3 a bottle or whatever, I would have laughed at you. I mean, water was
water is going to overtake Coca-Cola as the beverage of choice in the United States.
Yeah, well, yeah, it may have. I would not be surprised if it hadn't already. Yeah.
I think it's really close, and like the projection is like within a year or two, it is going to overtake soft drinks, bottled water.
Yeah.
I mean, you go to vending machines these days, and a lot of it is water.
Well, yeah. I was on the road today, so every time I went to a rest area, I'd go over and get a bottle of water out of the machine. Yeah. So
So did you get any blowback from writing these columns about political corruption
no,
in
I
Detroit?
actually had some people from Detroit Water who who gave me, or they were mostly older, older people who gave me, who fed me a lot of information about things that I hadn't even thought about or didn't know about. Um, but the politicians, you know, they didn't, I didn't get any blowback at all from them. They just ignored it. Like I wrote that column a year ago on Flint, and the governor didn't take it seriously until the end of September or early October. So, I mean, I'm ranting about it in January of last year, and so he waits another 9 months to to see anything wrong with it. So he obviously wasn't paying attention, or if nobody on his staff was saying to him, "We have a problem there." I don't
Well,
understand that. If General Motors can't use that water to build cars, how can it be good for human beings? I mean, it just defies logic. There's no common sense to any of it.
well, he got caught. They went from it being a local issue to a national issue, and the writing was on the wall when the mayor of Flint, the old mayor of Flint, Mayor Walling, lost the election, and the people voted in the new mayor, Karen Weaver, who ran on a platform of water reform. We're going to solve this problem. So as soon as she got sworn in, she just started doing what she said she was going to do. And so in the middle of December, she declared a state of emergency in in Flint. And that very day, the county commissioners said, you have to go through us in order to get the state to go along, and you've got the money. I think they were given like $12 million to solve the problem. You've got what you need. We're not going to call a special session, and we might not even put you on the agenda for January, because they were going to meet, I think, January 3rd. That was, and then 24 hours later, it became a national firestorm of media attention, and the county commissioners just automatically switched. It's as if they never even said that. It's like, sure, we're going to have a special session. Sure, we're going to, they bent over backwards less than 24 hours. And then the ball just started to roll, where Rachel Maddow wouldn't give it up. She just reported on it 4 days a week and just drilled into it. And that just, when you hear the story, it's just incredible, especially because this was hatched, a scheme through emergency management, that and all roads just went back to the governor. So you knew who the villains were. You knew who caused this mess. So he could not keep it under. It went beyond, a local problem, a local story. And they had stories. They had stories in the New York Times too, but there was always wrapped around confusion. We are in compliance. The water is safe. There's really no problem here. And they didn't give the citizens really too much ink. All the ink went to the state and the local governments. And they were saying, it smells, little coloration, but it's safe. We are in compliance. And the EPA supported that. They supported the state and the county. They knew it wasn't safe, but they supported it. And that's what's so egregious about the whole story, is the feds knew, and they were silent. They knew it. People were being poisoned, because their own internal documents showed it because of that whistleblower back in February. That's when he started, drilling down into this. So writing, I mean, there's nothing he could do. And so what the governor did was hire PR people because it's a PR problem.
Well,
it's not a public health issue.
Everybody who, when I did the call, I mean, I didn't get anybody say this to me, but the implication was that it's like, professional complainers that, you couldn't, anybody who was trying to make, like you were trying to stir up a controversy, gin up a controversy if you talked about it. And the people who spoke up for Flint were ridiculed by the powers that be until the last few months. Until it got so bad that they could no longer keep
as soon as the mayor came out and made that declaration and it got into the national spotlight, you could see immediately how the local press, especially the Flint Journal, went from supporting the state and safety and everything's okay, we're going to deal with it. As soon as she made that declaration and it hit that national spotlight, they flipped. Yeah. They started giving a lot more attention to the people that had damaged children, that were sick, that had liver damage. I talked to the mom on a show, Leanne Walters. She had to wait in a doctor's waiting room for 3 hours while the doctor got clearance from the city so she could get lab slips for her twin sons to get them checked for lead. I mean, yeah. I think that there are stories that have not been told when they hit the fan. It's just incredible how people went along to get along in this system, in the community. I mean,
well, it's going to cost billions. It's going to cost billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars for this duplicate water line we don't need, which is still being built. I mean, I drove up past it the other day, and I mean, they're still busily putting it in. So they'll, we're going to have 2 perfectly good pipelines to Flint. And
except that if there is a nuclear explosion, a disaster, then the KWA pipeline isn't going to work. They're going to go back to the Detroit pipeline, right?
Yeah, well, it's not as deep into Lake Huron, but it does go. It's in a part of Lake Huron that I doubt the Russians are going to be high on the Russian list.
Well, I think Russian isn't the one. It's going to be somebody in the Middle East or somebody else. Russia, they are trying to. They got their own problems. Yeah. And they don't want to go conquer other. They don't want our problems. Basically, who wants our problems? It would be Chinese. I mean, they're doing it right. They got the labor. All roads are going to China. So do you have a crystal ball in terms of how you see this playing out?
I didn't. I think I've lost you.
You lost me.
You broke up there on me. Do I have a crystal ball, you said?
Yeah. Do you have in your crystal ball, how do you see this thing playing out in terms politically?
I really don't have a crystal ball. I'm wondering if Governor Snyder can survive it. I know the thing now people are saying is that the governor should, instead of stepping down or resigning, that he should step up and lead, make Flint whole somehow. But I wonder if he, because it's getting the national press and the global press even, it's just been so relentless, and he looks so bad. I mean, he was this businessman who was going to come give us good business practices here in Michigan, and his departments have been, I mean, there's a textbook illustration of incompetence. I mean, the people he's appointed to run these departments have failed us. So he's this high-powered corporate guy. Well, if that's how he ran his corporation, then I mean, you know, you've run this state into the ground. So I don't know, and I wonder now if the Republicans don't think it would be in their best interest to get rid of him, because when they in 2018, when there was a gubernatorial election, I think Kildee from Flint will probably be the Democratic nominee, and I don't think the Republicans can beat him unless their best chance might be to have the Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley become the governor and give him a couple years to prove himself on the job, and then run him again in 2018. But right now, I think Snyder takes the Republicans out in 2 years, so they would probably be more eager to get rid of him than the Democrats are at this point. So as far as what happens, I mean, I know that the water line is going to be finished and Genesee County is going to be selling water line. I don't see any movement to have regulate water with the Public Service Commission, which is something I would advocate. I think Michigan needs to do that. That water utility prices need to be need to be approved by the PSC, just as if it was electricity or gas or any other utility. But I don't see any groundswell of movement for that to happen. So, and then the people in Flint, they're going to spend a lot of money in Flint, and maybe they can help those families. But you know, I don't know how, if your child's got lead poisoning, damage is done. That's you know, there's no magic wand that's going to change that. That child's been doomed for the rest of his or her life.
Or if you're an adult and you have kidney damage and you have lead, you may not be around to see your grandkids.
Yeah, and how do you make that good? You know, they're the president's put in 80 million, and I imagine next year's state budget, which will be coming, the budget proposal will be coming out here in a week or two. That there'll be big money in there for Flint. So we'll spend billions of dollars in Flint on this water thing. We're going to spend billions of dollars, and not any of it's going to move us an inch forward as a state. It's just going to be, all of it is going to be redressing mistakes, trying to clean up mistakes we've made. But
people, the people that were branded troublemakers, they talk about how they're trying to be driven out of the north side. It's poor, it's black. Do you have any sense of that? And that they're trying to make Flint a college town, so they are investing around the downtown areas, around the university extension, but there is a big push to get people to move out of Flint so they can develop it into agriculture or something that's more profitable than retired, dilapidated cities, or city.
Well, I know, Youngstown, Ohio was talking about something similar, where you kind of take a big chunk of your town and take it off the grid. Well, I'm not, Jack, just be truthful with you, I'm not close enough into, I mean, we're 75 miles away from Flint, so I'm not all that plugged into the local, the internal city politics and what they're planning to do. And, I can't speak to whether they're going to get rid of the north side of Flint and start fracking it. That's just not anything that I have any knowledge on.
How about the coverage that you've been seeing? Do you feel that is fair and balanced? The media coverage?
Yeah, I haven't any great complaints about it, I guess. I mean, it's obviously getting, I'm seeing, like I read an article in the Rolling Stone, and I know a lot of people think Rolling Stone has no credibility, but I thought it was a pretty good article here the other day by a fellow who lived in Flint as a young man. He was very angry. He had a point of view. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, I think the story it read to me as he went out and used some shoe leather and went out and talked to people, and it was an honest report, but it also mean, he was definitely angry, and his anger came through. Um, um, so I've been I've read what the New York Times and the Washington Post and the have done, and it's I think it's been competent reporting of the latest episode. What you don't have is anybody who goes back to what you're trying to do, go back to 1962 and bring it and try to wrap up the whole story. I haven't seen a lot of that, though. The Free Press today Detroit Free Press today had a timeline. So they're beginning to go back. And it's a very complicated, I'm telling you nothing that you don't already know, but it's a very complicated story. It's evolved over years, and we want to. It doesn't fit that 24-hour news cycle very well. You can't sum it up in a tweet or two. So at some point, I think it would be interesting to see if we see publications come and give the whole story of how Flint got to where it is.
I know you're retired. Do you have an interest in exploring this, since you kind of know some of the players? And
yeah, not a book. I mean, somebody needs to write that book, but that's not a book I want to write.
I know, but who's reading books these days, really?
Yeah.
And do you make any money writing a book?
Well, I actually wrote one and didn't make. I didn't lose any money, so I guess that's good.
What did you write your book on?
I actually, when I wrote a book on retirement, just to get ready for retirement. I co-wrote it. It was another fellow's idea, and so I ended up, he had the ideas and helped map it out, but I actually did most of the writing itself, and we self-published a book called "Don't Retire, Reinvent Yourself." So
you've retired. How long have you been retired?
Well, I've actually retired twice. I retired in 2008 was the first time, just in time to lose all my money. I retired.
How did you lose your money?
When the stock market, all my investments, when the stock market crashed, was right after I took my pension I was worried that the pension fund the company had might not be properly managed. It turned out to be perfectly good. I mean, it's done well as far as I can tell. So I took the lump sum payment and gave it to my, to the stockbroker, the money manager, and put it, bought all the stocks and bonds, right? And that was in June, and in September, everything went to hell. So what do I know, right? But me and everybody else I know, we worked all our life. We did everything people told us to do. We took the full maximum match on our 401 matches on our 401k, and I tell my wife we would have been better off if we'd have gone across the river to the casino or over to the horse track and bet on the ponies. So
you're an expert on retiring, because you retired twice.
Yeah. Well, then I started going back to the paper. I was just going back. I kept writing a column, which they paid me a week in essence to write the column. 8 hours was the way that worked, and I went in a couple nights a week and worked on the copy desk there. So that just got me out of my wife's hair. Got me out of the house a couple nights a week. So I was working three days a week for until last year, till about a year ago.
And where can people find your book?
They wouldn't find it easily now, so I don't really know what to tell them. We used to have a website, and it was a self-published book. So,
right. It's not on Amazon?
Yeah, you can probably get it on Amazon. Yeah, you probably could.
What's the name of it? Is it an ebook so people can download it?
Yeah, it's an ebook too. You can get it on your Kindle, sure.
Get it on your Kindle.
Yeah, don't retire, reinvent yourself.
Okay, well, I don't want to take any more of your time. I know you've been traveling all day. You're getting down there to Florida to hike and kayak.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and camp. and just and not look at this telephone for a couple days. So that's a big, to get away from the internet for a couple of days would be nice.
Okay, well, thanks so much for spending a little bit of your evening with me, Mike. I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. I'm not sure how much help I've given you, but I've sure enjoyed it. So,
there's
if any help to you.
There's nuggets, and I hope to talk to you again when you get back from your jaunt down in Florida.
Okay. Sounds good, Jack. Thanks again.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, why don't you stay on until I'm going to close this off right now.
Okay.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. And keep it right here. Check us out on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube for the most up-to-date information on the Flint water crisis.